liked and ask them if they had a small collection of poems, like, you know, shuffle up to them in poetry events and go, got any poems? And usually, well, magnificently, the ones that we asked said yes. So we're very proud to present 4 of those poets here tonight. And they are Paul Summers, Matthew Caley, Bernadette McAloon, and Degna Stone. And they'll each be reading for 10 minutes. And Julie and I will be popping in and out, just introducing and making sure that everything goes smoothly, whilst Carly's in the background, making sure the tech works. So all should be well. So I'm going to introduce Paul now, Paul Summers. He's going to be our first reader. And his pamphlet with us is called The Dreamer's Ark. Paul is not only a poet and a magazine editor and a writer of all kinds of things, he's also a visual artist. And the Dreamer's Ark has not only got beautiful poems in it, it also has 3 of his very beautiful artworks, which I think really enhances the pamphlet. And this pamphlet showcases poems and artwork drawn from his daily pilgrimage to where the River Tyne meets the sea. So that's where he lives, and he was doing this journeying, and that's where these poems arose. And I think when you listen to Paul read, it's kind of like finding a beautiful shell on a beach and sort of holding it to your ear. And there's this really sexy merman in there talking to you. It's always a delight to hear him read. So everybody, Paul Summers.
Yeah, over to the sexy merman. Thank you for that introduction. Never been labelled a sexy merman before, you know, but there's always a first. I'm just going to start with the first poem from the pamphlet, just to say a little bit more that the pilgrimage is very much that. It's I occupy this space most days at low tide between the Fish Quay and North Shields and the mouth of the river, and it's probably about a couple of kilometres worth of dangerous silt-covered rock that I choose to make my natural habitat, and sometimes I'm just wandering about the place, and sometimes I'm digging up a shipwreck. But when I do look up from digging my shipwreck, these poems are what's going on in front of my eyes or what's going on in my head. That's basically all we need to say. Right, the first one's called Alchemy, and it's for an artist friend of mine called Norby Price. On Freestone Point, all time dissolves, melting in the brine of the middle wave's spittle. Each stubborn rock, reluctant but complicit, contemplates its passage to dune or bar. Distance is a line of tailor's chalk, our future's poised in its arc-slick magic, the heft of cloud compressing light, conjuring violet from whispered white. I spend all of my life, I think, painting liminals. All I seem to do when I'm not writing or making the kids tea or doing my chores, I'll paint lines, sky and sea, and where I'm digging, there's also a bit of the South Pier, so there's always a black line running through everything I look at, and they might or might not appear in the poems. This next poem is called Blanc, and it's about a slightly manky day on the river, because you can't let bad weather stop you. You still just have to go down in it. In fact, there's something quite magical about being down there in the fog, just standing in the middle of the river, just you and a cormorant, and everything else is dulled out by fog. Blanc. Today, this river robbed of distance, erased cartography consigned to our ears, sandalin and curlew defining its edges, the foghorn boom, the breath of tide, the solitary gull imagining blue. And this next one's called The Returning. The codling are back, ghosting through the amber kelp, savouring the cold on the arc of their flanks. The sky has the hue of a dead man's lips, a rib of dense cloud advancing from the west. A brace of curlews forage on the skier, busy with subsistence, contented to repeat their threnody unbounded. This next one, very much about that act of collecting, I suppose, the act of picking things up and taking them home. And it's probably a pathology, I think, but it's but my house is full of stones and bottle tops and bits of like shards of pot, and at the minute probably about 5 tons of brass nails from this shipwreck that we're digging up. So but yeah, this is about beachcombing. It's called Trace, for another good friend of mine called Nev Clay. Today the sea, clad head to toe in winter's rage, rakes up its past, roaring out her bleak unwelcome, baits the scavengers with her loot, the maudlin and the poor-faced crow, unearths the trace of loss and gain, of lust, of death, of moments unfinished, of labour's pain and the seemingly mundane. The tooth of an ox who had fawned over sunsets, the sole of a shoe that had walked on gold, a broken mast, its core still straining with the tempest's blunt memory, a pipe still warm from a docker's cracked lips, a vulcanite stopper infused with their thirst, the polished bones of man and beast, each spur and burr filed off by time. Today, the sea, clad head to toe in winter's rage, rakes up the past. The red shanks bleat their false alarms, my pockets bulge with weighty votives. The surfer's weight, still poised to catch that perfect wave that never comes. And the other thing about the rocks is they kind of become a place of keening, a place of grieving as well, you know. So I suppose like anywhere you go to, little kind of sanctuary, I'm there by myself a lot of the time, and so you've just got space in your head to do your thinking. So this one anyway is kind of a little elegy really. It's called Your Catholic Smile. It's dusk on the scarp, curlews howl their staid laments, the light infirm repolishes the silt. A dead slow tide, tubercular wheeze mimics the gossip of distant trees. I have walked for a year this same cold mile, trolling the half-light for your Catholic smile. And then this one's called Saturnalia. The rocks, by the way, the two sets of rocks that I spend a lot of time on are the Black Middens and Freestone Point. And it's a kind of troll between the pair of them, like some sort of wading bird. This is called Saturnalia. Beyond the Midden's proudest peak, where limpets sculpt their cups and rings, just fishbone and whelk and wave-thrown clay, the raw divinity of crow and gull. Beyond the scarp, the reach of men diminished to a flimsy dream, the stab of grief to nettle sting. Here, a saint might make his god, and demons their legion, each strike of tide, reforging faiths. And then I think I'm going to finish off with the title poem, which is a bit of a fugue, because I wrote a series of things, because when you're out on the rocks, you're not just in the moment, you're also touching things which might be, 20 million years old when you're raking through the sort of fossil record. So time gets a bit distorted, and it especially gets a little bit distorted when I freak myself out at dusk or first thing at dawn on a fairly stormy day or a wispy day, and I can like a child, I suppose, scaring themselves with the monster under the bed, I can conjure up ghosties. So this next poem is it's really about traveling through time, and it's an imagining of the shipbuilders at the Haven. The Haven is a little beach right underneath Tyne Priory, and it doesn't look like anything now. It's got a few pleasure boats sat there now, but back in the day they would have been making boats to sail out over the North Sea and visit our friends on the continent. It's called the Dreamer's Ark. The oak is seasoned, the sawyer's done, each board and beam is shaved and steamed, rendered immaculate in barrel curves, planed and polished to perfect lapse. The rights slip glazed by noble toil, each limb in balance, each peg set tight, like lovers' vows, immovable in situ. Corked with hope and dogma pitched, our lines are tied, the mast is set, Beyond the lash of briny rain, the sirens call, a Kelpie chorus in refrain beseeches us to join them on their barricades of angry waves. Then truth and lies file 2 by 2, the ghosts of all our champions too, then faith and doubt complete the crew. The flexing muscle of a lunatic tide will raise us off our silt-kissed keel. Our petards primed, the mainsail draped, we'll voyage towards some promised land, towards a haven of our communion. This arc of gesture and good intent. Within the warp and weft of oily sheets, the reek of sheep, the thrill of transit. Its canvas chest heaved out in pride repels this barrage of a storm. Its swell embellished with gilded words, non nocere, do no harm. Thank you.
Paul Summers, thank you so much. How glad we are that you trawl through that sacred space and you're able to write The Dreamer's Arc. It's a wonderful pamphlet. Thank you for your poems. At the same time as we published Paul in summer 20, we also published a pamphlet by Angela Redman called Cooking with Marilyn, which is a Warhol-esque pamphlet, but unfortunately Angela can't read tonight. Also, Paul, I've got to say, I absolutely love the word threnody. That is, what a gorgeous word, thank you. Okay. I'd like to introduce our next poet, who is Matthew Caley. The first poem I ever read of Matthew's was Low Maintenance Rooftop Garden, which won a prize in the National Poetry Competition. I've realised that I can't actually stand on my daughter's rooftop without thinking of that poem. And then I realised that Matthew's poems actually change me, which is wonderful. What happens is some kind of neurological diversion in my brain, and I really, really enjoy his words too. Matthew has published 6 full-length collections, most recently Trawlerman's Turquoise with Blood Axe. He gave the Stanza 2020 lecture in March last year. The poems that he's written for Blueprint are very loose versions of modernist and surrealist French poets, and they were written last spring. He picked a book off his unruly bookshelf, that's Matthew's words, unruly bookshelf, as inspiration, and Prophecy is Easy is the result. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Caley.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you very much. Marais de Guérande, after Tristan Corbier. Where the sands ground up tibias and fibulas, tied a hacking cough, lunar spit, a deathly spate of spray. Marshworms bore for France. La Peste seems nerveless, but sweats up feverishly, nightlight on the blink, as hares bolt out of the couch grass as deserters. Some bleached laundress lays out tiers of corpse linen in the lupine sun, while her bipolar backup singers, the toads, croaking, Brexit, Brexit, foul the air of their squats, gas bags, sickly on their mushroom stools. That's a good one to start with. The bile, the kind of post-Baudelairean bile of Tristan Corbier. And strange, you know, reading a Corbier poem from, you know, decades and decades before that, he would be so prescient about Brexit. You know, that's an amazing coincidence. This book is called Prophecy is Easy after all. As Julie was saying, these were written in a real burst. Not this March, but the March before already, and so quickly that they came very, very quickly. So I was really blind to the fact that a lot of them seemed to be talking about lots of things to do with lockdown and the pandemic and things like that, as you'll see later. But they're not all bile-filled. This is one by after André Breton, and it's called Tikki. Supposedly, I tried to front out an ocean as greeny blue as a jellyfish's red eggs, moved by them into a clearing of water, to fall through that water, be caught by a pair of hands as soft as quails. But then all this segged to the scene where you propped me up against a woman's navel, an oleander's mother of pearl trunk wall, to gift me the right gravity, lay me out on the soft bed of spring, convince me that I have lived after, before, and on your bluey green peals of laughter. As you can see, I'm reading here from the place where we live between Gypsy Hill and Crystal Palace. And you'll see I've carefully done one of those virtual backdrops. It's of a really dodgy little room with very dirty Artex walls and ceiling. It took me years to mock that up. I really live in a gilded palace. Here's one of the poems which I was talking about, which at the time I was so blind or deaf that I couldn't involve with just the poems coming, that I didn't really see its connection at all, but it's so obvious to do with the pandemic. This is after a poet called Jules Supervielle. It's called The Sick Man. This sky is too bloody big, too big for travel, le ciel. As an ocean, this sky, too deep, no rooms available. This city too teeming, the countryside too dull. I am ceiling, sky, ground, water, squall. I have not adjusted to living well, still a maladjusted brat with a pail. I cough, then forget when I cough. All my handkerchiefs smell, and every one of my 61 years cough along as well, in chorus. The year 2020, the last century, free to fall, all newborns pre-equipped with senility, old men a no-go zone. Words curdle in my pen. A sunflower, a young man, a snowflake in hell is glowing. What's on my hands is infinitesimal. They begin to sing from balconies of hail. And I'll read this one. The Dread Words, a slightly longer poem, and then everyone starts blinking off from their little squares. Now this is, nothing can be too long in a pamphlet like this. It's 2 pages of A5. And this is called the Radiolarians. And as you're all brighter than me, you'll know what Radiolarians are. But particularly Paul, as a sexy merman of the northeast coast as he is, he'll know what those are. But I didn't when I read this poem after André Breton. But cleverly, I've inserted halfway through the poem, a scientific description of what they actually are in the poem as well. It's called the Radiolarians, and it's very loosely after André Breton. In the dazzling half-light of day, think of how dazzling full light might be. This day in 2020, though we are locked inside, outside the air is the colour of Matthias Rosé or fish scales with the sun on them. This forest waiting there for my arrival. A tree with leaves like Rizzler papers because I'm waiting for you. And if you walk with me to anywhere or nowhere, they are officially twin towns, your mouth will easily become as Niello on etched metal in some artist's studio, or the ceaseless wheel where a bluish cup, it will eventually be blue, is being thrown from whitish brown clay before the glaze makes it shine. All these illusions rise up to meet me as a rare red squirrel presses its white belly fur against my heart. He exists so easily because this forest reflects more back than the sea on the shore of which you lie prone, as complex as a pine cone, entirely bare, gathering up the radiolarians. Exclusively open ocean, silica secreting zooplanktons for the bi-curious seahorse that is us. Except I'm no longer there, have raised my head to look elsewhere, also twinned with nowhere, at a flotilla of white caskets floating out of my purview, and I am blue, blue as the hard fragments of sky in between the leaves, as sharp as a dragonfly. so I have to shut my eyes when our twin beds, concealed in the wall closet, collapse out by themselves, like the two central sepals of a giant May lily at night, able to prop up the entire night as I penetrate your soul with the sound of perfumes dispersed in aerosols, before they echo in diminishing peals, and, as if in another life, a glassblower breathing into the body of glass, lower myself to your waist so distance vanishes. And keeping with the coastal theme, why didn't I get introduced as a sexy merman? I mean, I've got webbed toes. I could prove it, but they're below the surface of my. This poem is called The Harbour Master, and this is after St. John Perse. When I say after, I really mean these are not even versions. I call them now diversions, because they really just use the original poem as a trampoline off which to bounce. Sometimes my poems are twice as long as the original, or much shorter. This is called The Harbour Master. How long has this thing been inside me, this poem, this dark antimatter, making its alliances with the outside world, without any seeming activity, among the sea pines, by the sea coast, into the black lacquered scales of the sea itself, into fibres of retreating mist, the slotted links of sun reflectors like chainmail. I am an alien in a public garden, by the gold spike fence of some embassy. CCTV has caught me in profile, looking over a security wall. They see alabaster or barbed wire. I see the sea fog, the sea squall, the harbour master. That was the penultimate poem, so just before the last one. Thanks to Blueprint, thanks to everyone at this festival, thanks for all the hard work of all the people behind, thanks to my co-readers. This last one is called Undress, and it's after a guy called Robert Desnos, you've probably heard of. And in the poem, he's kind of being a eminent Greece, giving wise old kind of advice to younger people to immerse themselves in life, using the kind of analogy of diving off a diving board. Now, in my own family, they'll just roll around laughing at me reading this because I'm by far the oldest person in the family and have the least sense and can't swim and can't drive and can barely do anything. I certainly can't pull down an Artex ceiling by myself. So they'll all be laughing because this poem is really probably a joke against myself rather than advice to the young or to my daughters. So I'll finish with this one. It's called Undress. Go on, undress, cleave gingerly into the mussy black lacquered waters. Don't stand afraid on the grass like a child, innocent of its fears. In your mind, you have already dived and know that water will run off innocent daughters in runnels, not be soaked up like a sponge. Yes, the moment has arrived in goggles with webbed toes in mock terror, and the diving board sings with its hinges. The planet is wild and vast, and your heart knows nothing of the errors of the intrepid, as the spaces between your toes have never known mud. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, you're more like a kind of Apollinaire pour nos jours, I think. And very sexy, obviously. Don't even have to say that, really, do I? As if you didn't know. Wonderful readings from both of you, just so good. I kind of think, could you recognize a Blueprint poet, by their collections? And I think it is hard to say. We have quite a varied set of poets, and each of them is uniquely brilliant. And thank you so much. I always love hearing both of you read, very much indeed. I'd like to introduce Bernadette McAloon now. I hope she's here because I can't actually see her on the thing, but I'm assuming she's here, so that's good. She and Degna are our two most recently published poets, and we're really pleased that both of them said yes when we approached them. Bernie is somebody that I've been kind of encountering for years, finding her poems in things like Butcher's Dog and other magazines and thinking, wow, that's a really good poem. or hearing her read out in a workshop and thinking, just, yeah, there's something about that I really like. So I was, both of us were very, very pleased when she said yes, when we asked her if she had a collection of poems. It's so great when poets say yes to you. So we were very pleased. And this set of poems is called Queen of Rare Mutations, and beautiful, supple poems that are both feminine and very powerful. That mix of fragile and strong. Eleanor Brown called this collection subtle, spacious, flooded with quiet light. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Bernadette McAloon to read for us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Clue. It turns out you can get lost anywhere. Northern village, broad daylight, walk into a maze. Find yourself midlife, circling your childhood years. An improbable spool of wool riddling the branches of a cedar could be considered a clue. Minos, dance, Ariadne, bull. You might assume you know where this yarn begins and ends. Spinning, you could turn back. Unraveling, you might think again. For anyone who's not familiar with the practice of oology, it is the collecting of birds' eggs, which, although criminalised in the 1950s, was still all the rage in the rural backwater I grew up in County Durham in the 1970s. The oologist. He would gather them at dawn. Shallow breath on a sparrow's nest, he'd hold them on his tongue, safe in his mouth for the slow climb down. All spring long, he'd spin them, prick them, blow them out, display them like pearls across a mantle breast before laying them to rest in a drawer. Billiverden blue. He coveted the bluest, laid in tapestries of fine dry grasses, moss, cobwebs, horsehair, feathers. He imagined heaven under eaves, among the ruins, in tussocks, gorse, hawthorn hedges. He pillaged jewels from starlings, jackdaws, finches, dunnocks, song thrushes, linnets. Aviarist. He left behind wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling cages of parakeets and cockatiels, prisoners with perches. I tend his opaline blues, lutinos, cinnamon greens, nest boxes of candied plumes and spangled conversations. Crest and crown, bastard wing and mantle. I am a queen of rare mutations. He taught the arts of hand-raising, of candling and cradling, the way when you brood a clutch of eggs, you capture one before it's fledged. I house an aviary in my head, a dissonance of feathers. I'm deafened by the noise and blinded by fluorescence. Birder. Propped up on pillows, an apparition of bones and feathers, his whispering inaudible, whistling and fluting, avian, unfathomable, strands of an accent fraying across blankets on a narrow bed. Later, a daughter, unravelling words at a desk, translating the fibres, interpreting the threads, backstitches, a life for them, imagines them a nest. And before I read the final 5 poems, I should probably add that religious mania of the Roman Catholic variety was also all the rage in the rural backwater I grew up in. The second clue. I know there are places a girl shouldn't go, but on nights like this, I can't resist spinning a line past the abbess, her head pure as an orchid, growing from a worn-out habit. And yes, I know a girl should never present at altar, hands open and human, hooves visible and cloven beneath the red rag of her dress. The killing jar. She flutters into land, folding her wings behind her back. He moves slowly, flips the net, nips her thorax in case she batters herself to death. He settles her with ethyl acetate, lays her out on rags, covers her with damp paper, softens her up over summer nights in his airtight, relaxing chamber. He tests her with tiny forceps, flicks her clubbed antennae, plies her slender legs, checks until her colours are ready to be spread. Pinning her smooth body, he presses her wings out flat, holds them down with fine strips, dries her out, tags her, mounts her under glass. Station Mass. Our mothers float above Bilberry Bank. Heat rises in the distance, wavering souls in a slow dance. Refracted in air, they call us back. Back to lay altars for Station Mass. The watermark rises in the kitchen. Beyond the door, sisters are sinking, hair like bladderwrack. Deep in pantries, eyes fade and drown in their sockets, grey, blue, black. The shift bell tolls down the cinder track. Our fathers emerge from cages. Brothers escape on trains. All their clocks spring forward. All of ours fall back. Messenger girl. The birds fell silent. The morning, the man from St. Vincent de Paul invited me in. The last house on my round, a pot on the stove, broth to warm the bones. The thing he did. When I told, they called it my sin. They sent me away when I started to show, hid my belly behind high convent walls, where I knelt with other girls to have my locks shorn scrub blood off sheets, filth off floors, the penance I've done, mea culpas I've known. When my time came, I was chloroformed. The sisters said my badly formed hips made my baby dead born. They use special instruments on girls like me to put right our sin, so we never find ourselves in trouble again. And finally, reliquary. A child's necklace clasped to a brooch with a buckled pin. A heapstead of nails, teeth, bones, skin. The voices of boys, a father's will. A stiletto heel circa 1978. Chair leg, bedhead, albums played. Sleep, silence, promises made. The face of a china doll under the wheels of a Silver Cross pram. The spirit of a girl in a white gown. The spirit of a woman in a white van. Ice, hymen, windscreen, veins, heartstrings, zips, bloodlines, chains, a light bulb in a lockup of broken things. Thank you.
Bernie, gosh, what a powerful poem Messenger Girl is. It really stays with a reader. And thank you so much. What a treat to hear you read from the pamphlet for the first time. What an absolute treat. Thank you so much. Okay, I've got to say that there's actually a third person within Blueprint Poetry Press. Behind the scenes, we have a printer called Bob, who's actually pulled out all of the stops during lockdown to print these pamphlets. He's been amazing, and reproduce all of the illustrations and artists' work like Paul so well. So yeah, he's an important part. Our final poet is Degna Stone. Jo and I asked Degna if she had a small collection of poems, and Degna sent us her pamphlet, which is going to be published during May, and it's called Weighing of the Heart. We were absolutely thrilled to read these poems. They're actually unflinching, they're searingly honest, and it's candid poetry, and the poetry in Degna's pamphlet absolutely twists the heart. I'll formally introduce Degna. Degna's works appeared in the Book of Newcastle, Press, 10 Poets of the New Generation and a Mighty Stream from Blood Axe, Writing Motherhood from Seren, Urban Myths and Legends, and Some Cannot Be Caught from the Emma Press, Crossings, Newcastle Centre for the Literary Arts, and Filigree, Paltry Press. Degna is a contributing editor at the Rialto and a co-founder of Butcher's Dog Poetry Magazine, and an associate artist with the Poetry Exchange and D6, Culture in Transit. She holds an MA in creative writing from Newcastle University and received a Northern Writers Award for her poetry in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, Degna Stone.
Hello, everyone. I really need to come up with a less dry sounding biography. Just first off, thank you to Jo and to Julie for asking me if I had any poems. I never actually thought these poems would venture out of the bottom drawer where they had found themselves. So it's really nice that they're making their way out into the world. Thanks to Paul and Matthew and Bernie, although it's kind of like kind of like want to not thank you as well, because now I feel really nervous about reading, because I've just really enjoyed your reading so much. Okay, so 10 minutes, crack on. So the background to the pamphlet is like 12 years ago, my husband needed emergency heart surgery, and don't worry, he did survive in the end, but these poems were all written around that time, or most of the poems were written around that time, and were written in response to being scared of losing someone and feeling utterly hopeless and helpless. Yeah, so the first poem I'm going to read kind of sets the scene and speaks to the inability of expressing your worries or of admitting that something might be wrong. I'm going to try and keep the bits in between poems to a minimum, but it's a sequence, so they tend to follow along from each other-ish. So the first poem is called Pallor. After the girls are fed, and you are not, after they are put to bed and stories are read, after we don't really speak as we sit on the sofa, after the work you couldn't leave at work is done, after all that, at 11 p.m. when it should be time for sleep, you begin your exercise, using parts of the house to work your tired body. Chin-ups on the door frame, tricep dips on the kitchen counter. After an hour and a half and still no food inside you, you stop to cool down, catch sight of your reflection. For a brief moment, you wonder who is looking back at you, who you have become. You catch me staring, ask, is everything all right? I want to say no, that underneath the muscle, decay is taking hold, that I can see it in your skin, smell it on your breath. I want to say I'm scared for you, for us, for the girls, that sometimes I swear the air around you smells like death. But instead I shrug, or maybe I say yes, because how can I tell you anything? Mr. Stone's bionic heart. The epigraph to this is a quote from an online medical dictionary. So subacute bacterial endocarditis is a bacterial infection that produces growths on the endocardium, the cells lining the inside of the heart, and if untreated can become fatal within 6 weeks to a year. Your heart beating could be heard across a room. I thought it beat so loudly for me, but you explained, a mechanical valve replaced the dilating aorta that would have killed you if you had lived without diagnosis. The sound was surgical steel thunking into place on each beat to stop blood regurgitating into your heart. That first night, I took Valium so I could sleep with my head on your chest. Years later, the night before you collapsed, I hadn't noticed how quiet your heart had become. 2 days into your hospital stay, we couldn't hear its beat at all. The surgeon talked through your chances, described the process of weeding out the vegetation growing inside its chambers. Your bionic heart had let us down. This next poem, actually Bernie and I did an MA together at Newcastle University, and this poem kind of like got honed during some of the workshops there. So it's called Mrs. Stone Visits Her Husband. She holds her breath as she rereads the guidelines for cleaning hands in the corridor outside ITU. She reaches for the dispenser, positions one hand underneath to catch the cold gel. Alcohol seeps into the broken skin of her palms. She rubs them. Fingers interlock, dance around thumbs, cradle wrists, killing bacteria to halt the spread of infections, the sign said. She repeats the motion until the hands wring dry, the sting diminished to a memory. She holds her hands together, not praying. Protocol requires her to dress for the occasion. The clear plastic catches as she pulls, she stops, slides the roll from its cradle, turns the weight over and reinserts. The sheet runs smoothly until a snap releases her protective apron. Without thinking, the transparent burden finds its way around her neck, fastens its arms around her waist. She waits, rereads the instruction, press for attention and wait. So ITU is a bit of a weird place, but there are moments of humour in the surroundings. There is no humour in these poems, apologies. So there was a piece of equipment called a bear hugger. So bear was spelled B-A-I-R, which was used to raise the body temperature after a long surgery. And there was also a fellow Midlander, because I'm from the Midlands, like visiting her dad in the next bay to my husband. So those things make their way into this poem, which is called Bear Hug, Freeman Hospital Intensive Treatment Unit. It is the first time in 7 days that your skin hasn't burned to touch. You're wrapped in a bear hugger to bring your temperature up after the surgeons had cooled you into suspended animation. The ward sister, who resembles a poet I know, returns to the end of your bed with her checklist. As I wait for you to wake, I talk to a woman who comes from the same neck of the woods as me. We share the same complicated relationships with our mothers. She gives me tissues scented with lavender that seem to stop the tears from coming. These small things keep my mind from the fifth bag of someone else's blood traveling through your body. Distract me from the tube attached to your chest that drains into a container under your bed. The liquid, which should be clear, darkens to rust with too much blood. I think I'm going to read 3 more poems. So this next poem is called Rooms. 1. I remade our home in the chambers of your heart, recreated your makeshift studio in your left atrium, rebuilt the shelves, lined them with tubes of oil, Mars black, Scarlet Lake, deep cadmium red. I tear pages from your sketchbooks, post them through the mitral valve on the beating floor. I kept your easel, handmade from rough wood, turned your unfinished self-portraits to face the wall. 2. I soon got used to the place being awash with blood. In the sitting room of your right atrium, your grandfather's side table, inlaid with ivory, and your late father's bureau crammed with notes are double wrapped in plastic to keep them clean. I even found a nook for the unstrung longbow taken from your grandmother's basin. 3 arrows hang next to it, point down at our heads. 2. In the right ventricle, the beat of muscular contractions distracts me from broken sleep, fitful sleep, no sleep. Our customized bed barely fits, and our daughters won't sleep alone now, so they lie next to me. The lamp, a wedding gift, stays on all night, but it dims and brightens in time with your heartbeat. I imagine the crack in the ceiling of our old house has followed me here and still grows in the night. 4. I crammed the rest of our things into your left ventricle, closed the door on the old piggy banks full of greening copper coins, chests of drawers that trap clothes like children's fingers in the gaps of doors, soft toys archived in transparent tubs gather fussed in their guts. The dark spots on the walls that started as pinpricks grow into a garden of bacterial vegetation, creep over your aorta, threaten to overwhelm us all. So the final 2 poems in the pamphlet are the ones I'm going to read now. The first references the ceremony from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and hopefully the second will bring a touch of lightness, a little bit of hope at the end. So this is the title poem, Weighing of the Heart. When John Dark held your heart in his hands, did he check its weight? When he stitched the homograft into place, a little piece of someone else holding your life together, did he measure your heart's worth, just in case? At the 13th hour of your surgery, my heart was so heavy I had thought it would be devoured. I wasn't true enough. My belief wasn't strong enough. I had not done enough to bring you back. Mrs. Stone lies awake. There were nights when the world applied a persistent pressure to every bit of your skin, when we both felt lost and far from home. And now I'm lying next to you, listening out for the missing click of a mechanical valve, counting out the beat of your mended heart. I'm trying to get back to where we were, praying it's as simple as putting my head on your chest and falling asleep. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again to Jo and Julie and to everyone at the Stay at Home Festival. And to everyone for listening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Degna. That's the first time I've heard you read them. It's a real treat. And the same for Bernie, first time I'd heard you read those. So what a wonderful treat that has been. Well, I think we're about to get slung out of here because there's another load of people waiting in the waiting room. So I just want to say thanks so much. Wonderful poets. We're so proud to be publishing you. Thank you. And to the audience for coming, and to the Stay at Home for hosting this lovely event. It's been a really lovely evening. Thank you so much, everybody. And